went out over Memorial Day weekend to do some suspension testing on a buddy's 450 SXF. It's a 2018, still has air forks and the stock linkage shock. Air forks, of course, especially this generation, a little bit quirky. They tend to sit really high, hard to get some of the harshness and crustiness out, and when you do, sometimes they get real soggy. So just right off the bat, doing a little bit of baseline testing. I'd already put a setting in here right before we did this, trying to get it a little bit closer, and then we were out here fine-tuning it, looking at what the bike's doing, what the front wheel's doing. The shock was close-ish. The forks, the bike was really unstable through this chatter stuff. We were using this kind of slightly washed out turn for testing, and the front wheel would just not stay on the ground. The bike wouldn't track straight. And then wanted to make sure that the bike jumped and landed fairly flat, so and it could take a hit, right? So we're trying to do that balance of comfort versus bottoming resistance and get that stability out of it. And of course, going a little bit stiffer to be able to take hits, it's going to be a bit firmer. Doing some checks here in braking bumps to make sure that under hard braking it's not using all the travel in the forks, especially with the rally setup on the front. It's pretty common to get into this point where the forks feel good when you're riding around, but when you're hammering the brakes through bumps, you're blowing through the travel. If you can get the front to stay up a little bit more, it does tend to steer a little better, track a little straighter under braking because you're not losing all your rake. The bike doesn't wallow as much. And you can see kind of the same thing here. It used all the travel going through here, kind of falling into that rut. The bike loses speed and tends to deflect and wallow through the rut. So trying to get some of that low speed damping, get some of that hold up so that instead of the bike just stopping, it can roll through. The front stays high. It doesn't just bury the front and stop. And of course, this was we're doing some testing trying to get the bike working in the desert, so we're doing the best we can with the woods here. But some of these rollers and kind of washed out-ish choppy terrain is something that you'll see everywhere. So trying to make sure that the bike still has good travel, the back end staying planted, it's not bucking, not kicking, and not bottoming out, which was the big issue before. This bike had been revalved before I started working on it. It was really soft. Now trying to build some of the support back into it so that it's more controllable and less fatiguing when you're riding all day on it. Again, trying to look at what the bike does jumping and is it landing flat? Is it rebounding nose high or tail high? Of course, there's a lot of body position that goes into that. So trying to separate the variables of body position from what the suspension's making the bike do. And then going for a full loop of our test course with me riding behind so that I can see kind of what the shock's doing, what the bike's doing. Rider feedback, of course, is really valuable, but also seeing what the bike is doing is sometimes gives some hints as to what we can do with it as well. We did end up going softer on the air pressure in the fork, which is something that I have found helps these work better, especially these earlier air forks that have a very short and very high in the stroke compensation bypass for the bottom part of the air chamber, the compensation chamber. They tend to ride so high that if you can get them to sit a little bit lower, the air fork is super progressive anyway, and then use some good controlled damping to make sure that the fork is cycling properly, doesn't bottom out, isn't skipping over stuff. When we first got out here, the fork had enough pressure in it that there wasn't any rebound travel left if you were accelerating through chop, and no steering damper or anything. Going through that choppy stuff, the bars would start to oscillate back and forth. So that was one of the behaviors we were really focused on trying to get rid of, right? We want the bike to track straight, and if it does start to wobble, be able to get itself out of it and keep that front wheel on the ground.